I met Sabrina about a year and a half ago at my buddy Marcus's housewarming party. Marcus had just bought his first home, and he invited a bunch of friends to celebrate with food, music, and drinks. The place was full of laughter, conversation, and the kind of energy that makes you feel like life is going well. I wasn't expecting to meet anyone that night, because dating wasn't a priority for me at the time. I was focused on work, personal goals, and enjoying a quiet life without unnecessary complications. But Sabrina walked in wearing a bright smile and an air of confidence that drew attention immediately. She carried herself like someone who believed she belonged in the spotlight, and everyone noticed her. Marcus leaned over to me and said she was the type of girl who attracts chaos without even trying. I laughed it off, assuming he was exaggerating like he usually does to make his stories more entertaining. She eventually came over to where I was standing, and we struck up a conversation that felt natural at first. She introduced herself as a social media brand strategist, a title that sounded impressive and modern. She spoke about building her online presence, connecting with brands, and creating content for her followers. She talked fast, with excitement, like someone describing a dream that was just starting to become real. At that moment, I admired her ambition and the passion she had for her chosen path in life. She asked about my work, and when I told her I managed construction projects, she smiled politely. I could tell she wasn't particularly interested, but she pretended well enough to keep the conversation going. Before the night ended, she gave me her number and said we should continue our conversation sometime. I left the party thinking she was interesting, driven, and different from the women I usually met. Our first date happened a few days later, and that's when I noticed the first subtle warning signs. I suggested a quiet Italian place I liked, but she gently insisted on somewhere more elevated and trendy. She explained that she needed to maintain a certain image because people followed her lifestyle online. We ended up at an upscale restaurant, and she spent the first 15 minutes photographing the table setup. She posed with her drink, her appetizer, and even adjusted the lighting to get the perfect shot for her feed. She barely touched her food before it got cold because she was too busy capturing aesthetic content. When the bill arrived, she excused herself to make a quick call and returned after I paid it. I brushed it off because the date felt new and exciting, and I didn't want to be petty or judgmental. The second and third dates followed a similar pattern, and she never once reached for the check. Each time, she chose expensive places, and each time, I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. I told myself she would eventually offer, or maybe she had different ways of showing affection or appreciation. My friends raised eyebrows when I told them about her, but I defended her with excuses that sounded weak. I thought I was just being generous, but deep down, something didn't feel balanced or reciprocal. Still, I kept seeing her because I was drawn to her confidence, beauty, and the excitement she carried with her. Sabrina started spending more time at my place after the first couple of months. At first, it was small things like staying over on weekends and leaving a few outfits in my closet. She said it was more convenient because her apartment was farther from the places we liked to hang out. I didn't think much of it since I enjoyed having her around, and the house felt lively with her there. Soon, weekends turned into long weekends, then several nights a week without any discussion. She slowly blended into my daily routine, as if she had always lived there, and nothing needed to be addressed. She brought more clothes, then her makeup, skincare products, and hair tools took over the bathroom counter. One morning, I opened a drawer expecting my things, and it was filled with her accessories and jewelry. By month 6, she had unofficially moved in without ever acknowledging that it happened. I hinted that if she was staying so often, we should talk about splitting utilities or contributing somehow. She laughed and said she wasn't actually living there, just staying over because she enjoyed being with me. She claimed it would be unfair to expect her to pay for a place she was, officially, calling home. When I came home from long workdays, I would find dishes piling up in the sink and clothes on the floor. She spent hours on the couch watching shows, scrolling on her phone, or editing pictures for her social media. If I mentioned chores, she would brush it off with excuses about being busy creating content for her brand. She ordered delivery meals constantly and charged them to my account because she said it was part of her image. She argued that trying new restaurants was necessary for engagement and maintaining her online presence. My grocery spending increased, the utilities went up, and my credit card bill kept getting heavier every month. She never bought household essentials, and if she used something up, she didn't replace it or mention it. She treated the house like a hotel with full service that required no effort or responsibility from her. If I questioned her spending, she acted offended and implied that supporting her dreams was part of being a partner. She once told me that successful relationships require investment, and my role was to provide stability. Meanwhile, her contribution was to look attractive and bring feminine energy into the relationship. Marcus started noticing the change in my lifestyle and asked if everything was truly okay at home. He pointed out that I seemed tired, stressed, and financially stretched despite earning a solid salary. I kept defending Sabrina by saying she was building something meaningful and needed time to grow. Deep down, I knew something wasn't right, but I kept convincing myself that this phase would pass soon. Her friends visited occasionally, and they treated my house as if it were a luxury set for social content. They took pictures in my living room, borrowed items without asking, and complimented Sabrina on her beautiful home. Not once did she correct them or mention that it wasn't hers, and it felt like she took pride in the illusion. I realized I was becoming a background character in my own home, while she played the lead role in hers. Despite the growing imbalance, I told myself I cared about her, and relationships required sacrifice and patience. I didn't want to seem controlling or stingy, so I swallowed my discomfort and let things continue unchanged. What I didn't know was that tolerating a little at the start would eventually cost me far more later. The breaking point began on the night of a professional networking event Sabrina had begged me to attend. She claimed it was a huge opportunity for her to meet business owners and potential brand partners for collaborations. She spent hours preparing, choosing a new dress, styling her hair, and rehearsing introductions in the mirror. She kept repeating that first impressions mattered, and she needed to look successful to attract successful people. By the time we left the house, she had turned the evening into a personal red carpet moment rather than a work event. The venue was upscale, filled with entrepreneurs, executives, and polished young professionals ready to network. As soon as we walked in, Sabrina shifted into performance mode like a social chameleon, connecting to a new environment. She strutted through the room with confidence, scanning for people who looked wealthy or influential enough to benefit her. I went to get drinks, while she immediately slipped into a conversation with a man in a tailored navy suit. When I returned, she was laughing loudly, lightly touching his arm and leaning closer than necessary. I handed her the glass of wine, and she barely acknowledged me while continuing her conversation with him. She introduced me with a tone that made my job sound insignificant compared to his shiny business background. I felt like an accessory she didn't want to admit she brought, someone she needed to downplay to appear available. Throughout the night, she bounced from one man to another, using charm, flirtation, and physical touch as her strategy. She spoke about marketing, lifestyle branding, and elevated partnerships, but her body language told a different story. She adjusted men's ties, touched shoulders, and laughed with the intention of creating chemistry rather than professional rapport. I noticed several men looking at her like she was single, and she did nothing to correct their assumptions. She never mentioned she had a boyfriend, never stayed near me, and never included me in her conversations. When I tried to join her circle, she subtly shifted to distance herself so she could keep their attention on her. Everything she did felt disrespectful, and I was standing there watching her treat those men better than me. One moment stood out when she practically pressed herself against a guy as he whispered into her ear. That image burned into my mind and made me realize how little she valued my presence at the event. I pulled her aside and calmly expressed that her behavior was crossing lines and making me uncomfortable. Instead of understanding, she rolled her eyes like I was a burden interrupting her important moment of networking. She laughed and said I was being insecure, jealous, and dramatic for no valid reason at all. She insisted that this was professional behavior, and I needed to learn how high-level networking worked. I told her I just wanted basic respect and acknowledgement that we were at the event together as a couple. She said a confident man wouldn't feel threatened when his girlfriend talked to other people in a social setting. I repeated that she was flirting, not networking, and she immediately raised her voice to embarrass me. She told me I was embarrassing myself by acting clingy, controlling, and emotionally fragile in front of others. Then she pointed toward the exit and said the sentence that shattered any remaining doubt in my mind. If you're unhappy, the door's right there, and nobody's forcing you to stay. For a moment, I stood silently, stunned that she would say something so dismissive and arrogant. She expected me to stay, drive her home, apologize, and act like nothing happened the next day. But something inside me finally snapped into clarity, and I knew she didn't think I had the courage to leave. I looked at her one last time, nodded, and without another word, I walked out of the event and into the night. I drove away from the event with my phone buzzing nonstop, but I ignored every call and message from Sabrina. I wasn't ready to speak, explain, or defend how I felt because I needed space to think clearly for once. Instead of going home, I went straight to Marcus's place, knowing he'd be awake and honest with me. Marcus opened the door, took one look at my face, and knew something serious had happened. We sat in his kitchen while he made coffee, and I told him everything that went down at the event. He listened quietly, only nodding, letting me finally say things I had been holding in for months. When I finished, he leaned back and said he had been waiting for me to reach this point for a long time. He told me Sabrina had been using me like a safety net, not valuing me as a partner or equal. Hearing someone say aloud what I had avoided admitting made something shift inside me. Marcus reminded me that I had been offered a transfer to Phoenix months earlier with a huge promotion. I had put that opportunity on hold because I didn't want to leave Sabrina behind at the time. The more we talked, the clearer it became that staying in that relationship was holding me back. We spent the next few hours going through everything logically, the way I approach work situations. Marcus suggested I treat this like a personal project, with steps, deadlines, and a final goal. Step 1 was accepting the transfer and officially moving forward with the relocation. Step 2 was detaching myself financially, emotionally, and legally from anything tied to Sabrina. He told me to stop giving warnings because she had never listened to them anyway. Her words at the event had given me the perfect reason to take action without guilt or hesitation. The next morning, I contacted my company's HR department to restart the relocation process. They were thrilled, and the transfer was approved faster than I expected with full support. I learned they would cover movers, temporary housing, and assist with address changes and utility closures. This information gave me a sense of relief and confidence that I could leave cleanly and efficiently. I then began listing everything Sabrina was using that belonged to me or was under my name. Streaming services, internet, utilities, groceries, subscriptions, car payments, and household expenses. I realized I had been financially carrying both of us, while she contributed nothing but criticism. I made calls to prepare disconnections and password changes, but scheduled them after I moved out. I wanted to leave quietly, without drama, without confrontation, and without giving her time to interfere. A few days later, I packed a suitcase while Sabrina was out, taking only what I truly needed for now. I packed calmly and methodically, making sure I didn't forget important documents or essentials. When she came home and saw the suitcase, she laughed, assuming I was being dramatic again. She claimed I'd be back in a day because I always cooled off and apologized after arguments. But I wasn't that person anymore, and her confidence in my return only motivated me more. I took a deep breath, thanked her for showing me the door, and walked out of my own house. I left the keys on the counter because once I moved, she would no longer have access to the property. Sabrina followed me outside, yelling that I was acting childish and ruining something special. Her words didn't hurt this time, because I finally saw the truth behind them. I drove away, not to cool off, but to start the first real step of leaving the relationship entirely. For the first time in months, maybe longer, I felt a sense of control over my own life again. I stayed at Marcus's place during the first week after leaving, and it felt strange but freeing at the same time. Sabrina called repeatedly, sent long messages, and tried every approach from anger to guilt to get a response. I didn't reply because anything I said would only pull me back into the same exhausting cycle with her. Marcus checked his phone and laughed as he read the messages she sent him, trying to find out where I was. He replied with vague jokes and memes, refusing to give her any real information or help her reach me. Meanwhile, I focused on preparing for my relocation and tying up loose ends before leaving Denver completely. I changed passwords for streaming services, banking apps, and everything she had access to during our time together. I called utility companies and scheduled disconnections since everything was under my name, not hers. She didn't realize the comfort she lived and depended entirely on me handling every responsibility quietly. By midweek, she began feeling the consequences when Netflix logged her out and the Wi-Fi stopped working. She complained to Marcus that the internet was down and accused the service provider of sabotaging her. Marcus shrugged and reminded her that it wasn't her account, so it wasn't her problem to fix anymore. 2 days later, Sabrina discovered a bright orange parking ticket on her car windshield for overnight street parking. She had avoided using the driveway because she was scared of scratching her car on the fence, so she parked outside. But she never bothered getting the required permit because she expected me to handle those things. Without me there, she faced a second ticket the following night and blamed the city for having unfair rules. A week later, I left Denver for Phoenix, started settling into my temporary housing, and embraced the fresh start. Sabrina tried calling my parents, my sister, and even my office to track me down, but no one helped her. My family protected my privacy and told her I needed space, and she should respect that boundary. Within 2 weeks, she posted online about being betrayed and abandoned, trying to gain sympathy from followers. The comments quickly turned against her when people pointed out she had never worked or contributed to her life. Some even hinted they saw her flirting with men at events and questioned her version of the story. She then tried contacting one of the men she flirted with at the networking event, hoping he could support her. Once he realized she had been in a relationship that night, he blocked her and refused to get involved at all. As bills accumulated and groceries ran out, Sabrina experienced for the first time what living alone truly cost. She tried applying for an apartment, but landlords requested proof of income, references, and credit checks she didn't have. She had never put any utilities or leases under her name, so she couldn't prove financial reliability to anyone. A month after I left, she was asked to leave the house because she wasn't on the lease or authorized to stay there. She called Marcus in tears, claiming she was being unfairly kicked out after everything she had been through. Marcus reminded her that she had once told me to use the door if I was unhappy, and now she was facing reality. With nowhere else to go, she rented a tiny studio in a rough neighborhood she used to make fun of. She got a job as a server at a sports bar, working long shifts and dealing with demanding customers. Her glamorous lifestyle disappeared, replaced by budget meals, public transportation, and discount clothing racks. The car I cosigned for was repossessed after missed payments, and I ended up paying the balance to avoid debt. I took ownership of the car, sold it, and made money from the situation that had once been a burden. It was ironic that the same car she flaunted online became the final reminder of how poorly she treated me. As I built a better life in Phoenix, Sabrina was finally forced to build one of her own without anyone carrying her. 4 months after I walked out of that event, my life in Phoenix looked completely different from before. I had settled into my new role at work, earning more, learning more, and feeling respected and valued again. I lived in a clean apartment that I paid for myself, and everything in it felt like a reflection of my own choices. The peace and freedom of living alone reminded me how heavy my life had felt when Sabrina was in it. I reconnected with hobbies, exercised more, and rebuilt a sense of self that I had slowly lost over time. I also started seeing someone new, a nurse named Emily, who treated relationships like partnerships, not transactions. She insisted on splitting bills, shared responsibilities, and communicated openly without ego or manipulation. Being with her showed me how healthy and balanced a relationship could be when both people gave equally. Just when I thought Sabrina was fully behind me, an unknown number sent a message asking to meet for coffee. She said she was in Phoenix for a job interview and wanted to talk in person if I was open to it. I hesitated, unsure if meeting her would be a step backward, but curiosity made me agree to one short meeting. We chose a public coffee shop, and I arrived a little early, unsure of what version of her would show up. When she walked in, I barely recognized her because everything about her energy had changed. She wasn't dressed to impress, wore minimal makeup, and carried herself with a quiet humility I had never seen. She sat down gently, thanked me for coming, and took a moment before speaking as if choosing her words carefully. She apologized sincerely for how she treated me, admitting she had been selfish, entitled, and blind to her behavior. She said losing everything forced her to face who she had become and how she used people without gratitude. Sabrina told me she was living alone in a small studio and working long shifts just to cover basic expenses. She described eating simple meals, taking the bus, and learning how expensive life was when no one funded it. She admitted she used to look down on normal jobs, but now she was grateful for any work she could find. She said she wasn't there to ask for help, a second chance, or money, because she no longer expected handouts. Instead, she wanted to acknowledge the damage she caused and thank me for finally walking away. She said my decision forced her to grow up, confront her flaws, and stop chasing a fantasy life built on others. For the first time, I heard her speak with accountability instead of excuses, defensiveness, or manipulation. Hearing her accept responsibility didn't erase the past, but it softened the bitterness I once felt toward her. When we stood to leave, she told me that whoever I was with now was lucky to have someone like me. She said she hoped I never lost my kindness, but also never again ignored my own worth for someone else. Before walking out, she looked toward the cafe door and said the sentence that once broke our relationship. She said she never believed I would actually use the door that night, and she was glad I proved her wrong. After she left, I sat quietly, realizing I had closure without needing revenge, anger, or a dramatic ending. Sabrina and I were done, truly done, but now the story ended with growth instead of resentment or regret. I walked away again, but this time with peace, understanding that sometimes the hardest goodbye brings the best beginning. Walking away from Sabrina was one of the hardest decisions I ever made, but it changed everything for the better. I realized I had spent so much time trying to fix a relationship that was never built on respect or balance. Leaving forced me to rebuild my life from the ground up, and every step afterward felt lighter and more genuine. I learned that love without appreciation becomes obligation, and obligation without effort becomes resentment. No one should have to beg for basic respect, honesty, or shared responsibility in a relationship. Meeting Sabrina again showed me that people can change, but change doesn't require us to return to the past. Sometimes, we walk away not to punish someone, but to protect the parts of ourselves we neglected too long. I no longer felt anger toward her, because growth had replaced bitterness, and peace had replaced pain. The experience taught me to recognize my own worth and never settle for a relationship that dims who I am. Using the door wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a life I should have chosen sooner. And now, I'm finally living it, with clarity, self-respect, and someone who values me just as much as I value them.